They decided she did not belong here in less than 3 seconds. Not because of anything she said, not because of a rule she broke, but because of the way she looked, standing still, silent, holding a boarding pass in her left hand, while the room breathed around her. The private first-class lounge at JFK Terminal 4 was built to feel untouchable. Sound died here. Voices lowered without being asked. The air smelled faintly of espresso, leather, and something antiseptic, like money had been scrubbed clean before entering. Frosted glass sealed the space from the terminal chaos outside. Inside Amufu, everything moved slowly on purpose. Avery Collins stood near the entrance, just inside the invisible boundary that separated the admitted from the tolerated. She did not fidget. She did not scan the room. She simply adjusted the cuff of her coat, the soft cashmere whispering under her fingers, and waited. She was 36 years old, tall, still. Her posture was effortless, spine straight without stiffness, deep brown skin, hair pulled back into a sharp bun that revealed nothing unnecessary, no jewelry beyond a slim watch hugging her wrist, no designer logos announcing wealth. Her carry-on was matte black aluminum, lightly scuffed at the corners, the kind of wear that came from repetition, not neglect. Across the room, a man laughed too loudly at his own joke. A woman in a tailored blazer tapped her phone with manic precision. Somewhere, silverware clicked against porcelain. The lounge hummed with low entitlement. Behind the desk, Linda Parker was typing. Her fingers moved fast, nails clicking like small hammers against the keyboard. She did not look up. She did not need to. She had already seen Avery in her peripheral vision, long enough to decide. Avery took one step forward. The marble floor was cold through the thin sole of her shoes. She stopped at the desk, close enough to be acknowledged, far enough to not intrude. "Excuse me," Avery said. Her voice was calm, low, controlled. It did not rise or soften to please. "I'm checking in for Flight 109 to Zurich." Linda finished the sentence she was typing before lifting her head. When she did, her eyes flicked over Avery with clinical efficiency. Coat, bag, hair, shoes, no visible markers she recognized as belonging here. Linda's mouth tightened, just slightly. "The business lounge is down the hall to the left," Linda said, already reaching for another key on the keyboard. Her tone was sweet in the way sugar coats poison. "This is the flagship first-class lounge." Avery did not blink. "I'm aware," she said. She placed her passport and boarding pass gently on the marble counter. The paper lay flat, perfectly aligned, like it had been measured. "I'm seated in 1 Alpha." Linda let out a short breath through her nose, almost a laugh. She picked up the boarding pass with 2 fingers, as if it might stain her. Her eyes dropped to the barcode. The scanner beeped once. Green. The sound was small, but it landed heavy. Linda frowned. She scanned it again. Another green beep. Her jaw tightened. She typed faster now, irritation rising behind her eyes. Something here was not matching the picture she had already formed. "There seems to be a discrepancy," Linda muttered, more to herself than to Avery. "The system shows 1 Alpha is occupied." "It is," Avery said. "By me." Linda's lips pressed together. She did not like the correction. "No, I mean physically," she replied, looking up now, her gaze sharper. "Mr. Charles Whitmore checked in 10 minutes ago. Global Services. Diamond Medallion. Very important client." The words were delivered like a verdict. Case closed. Avery felt the temperature in her blood drop. Not from fear, from clarity. The name landed with recognition. Old money. Real estate. Boards and mergers, and men who mistook volume for authority. "I purchased this ticket at full fare 3 weeks ago," Avery said, leaning in just enough to be heard clearly and by no one else. "I have a meeting in Zurich with the heads of a Swiss financial institution in 8 hours. I need the workspace in 1 alpha. Please fix it." Linda bristled. The queue behind Avery shifted. A man in a grey suit sighed loudly, checking his watch. Linda straightened, lifting her chin. "Ms. Collins," she said, reading the name as if it might be wrong. "I can move you to business class. We'll offer a $500 travel voucher for the inconvenience. But I cannot move Mr. Whitmore. He has priority status." "And I have a contract of carriage," Avery replied. Her voice hardened, just enough. "Do not downgrade me." Linda's eyes flashed. "It's the best I can do," she snapped, sliding the passport back without meeting Avery's gaze. "Please step aside. You're holding up the line for our frequent flyers." There it was. The line, the boundary, drawn clean and final. Avery took her passport. Her fingers did not shake. She did not ask for a manager. She did not raise her voice. She understood exactly how this would play out if she did. Security, labels, removal. She needed to be on this plane. "Fine," she said softly. "I'll handle it on board." Linda rolled her eyes. "Good luck with that." The jet bridge smelled like recycled air and jet fuel. The Boeing 777 waited outside the glass, massive and patient. Inside, the cabin lighting glowed amber, designed to calm people who paid for calm. Avery boarded with steady steps. Her heart beat slow and heavy, like a drum underwater. "Welcome aboard," said the lead flight attendant, Rachel Monroe, her smile practiced and thin. "Seat 1. Alpha, Rachel's smile faltered. "Oh," she said. "Yes." The pause was small, but Avery felt it. "There's a bit of a situation," Rachel added, lowering her voice. "There is no situation," Avery replied, already moving past her. "I have a ticket." She turned left into the first-class cabin. The space opened like a private gallery. Individual suites, sliding doors, polished wood, crystal glassware catching the light. And there, exactly where Avery expected him to be, sat Charles Whitmore. He filled the seat the way men like him filled rooms. Broad shoulders, flushed face. His navy suit jacket lay discarded on the ottoman. A glass of champagne rested in his hand. He was laughing into his phone, loud enough to be heard over the cabin's engineered hush. "I told the board to shove it," he said. "If the liquidity isn't there by noon, we dissolve the merger. I don't care about filings." Avery stopped at the entrance to the suite. "Excuse me," she said. He did not look up. took another sip. Yeah, hold on, he said into the phone. Then finally, his eyes lifted. They slid over her, not registering, not really seeing. I don't need a refill, sweetheart, he said, his mouth curling. But you can take that jacket and hang it up. He flicked his wrist toward the discarded suit. Avery stood still. I'm not a flight attendant, she said, and you're in my seat. The words landed, slow, deliberate. Charles blinked, processing. Then he smiled, a proprietary smile, the kind that assumed victory before the game began. Your seat, he said. I don't think so. I'm Charles Whitmore. I practically own this airline. You're double booked, Avery replied, and I have the original confirmation. The smile widened. The cabin seemed to lean in, and somewhere, unseen but already in motion, a clock had begun to tick. Charles Whitmore laughed, a sharp barking sound that bounced off the polished wood and soft leather like it belonged there. He leaned back into the suite, stretching his legs as if claiming territory. Listen, he said, lowering his voice in a way that carried anyway. I don't know who you had to charm to get a seat up front, but this is first class, real first class. You're double booked. Happens all the time. Take it up with the crew. Avery felt the weight of every eye in the cabin shift. Not openly. Not yet. But attention had a way of changing the air. She could feel it press against her skin, a subtle tightening like humidity before a storm. She met his gaze without flinching. His eyes were glassy with alcohol and confidence, the dangerous combination of a man who had never been told no in a way that stuck. I'm not interested in your opinion, Avery said. I'm interested in my seat. Please move. Charles stared at her for a beat, incredulous. Then he laughed again, louder this time. Did you hear that? He said into his phone, turning his head slightly. This girl thinks she's kicking me out of 1 Alpha. He shook his head, amused, then dropped the phone into his lap. Honey, he said, his voice thick with condescension. There's a nice seat in the back. Row 40-something. Near the bathrooms. You'll be more comfortable there. Before Avery could respond, footsteps hurried down the aisle. Rachel Monroe appeared, breath tight, eyes darting between them. She positioned herself instinctively closer to Charles, her body angled as if shielding him, even though he did not need protection. Her smile was gone now, replaced by the rigid professionalism of someone who wanted this resolved quickly and quietly. Ms. Collins, Rachel said under her breath, can I speak with you for a moment? Avery did not move. I'm fine, right here. Rachel's jaw clenched. She lowered her voice further, but it sharpened. You're causing a disturbance. I need you to lower your tone. I haven't raised it, Avery replied. He's refusing to vacate the seat I paid for. Charles smirked, lifting his glass in a mock toast. See? Aggressive already. Rachel did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Avery, and in them was something colder than impatience. Calculation. Mr. Whitmore is a priority partner, she said. We've accommodated you in seat 4, Bravo. It's business class. Very comfortable. Please take your seat so we can prepare for departure. The words settled like a weight on Avery's chest. She felt the familiar tightening, the old equation forming in her mind. Compliance versus escalation. Dignity versus access. She glanced past Rachel, toward the cockpit door, closed and indifferent. She could see how this would end if she pushed. Raised voices. Security. Headlines with her face framed by someone else's narrative. "You're asking me to move," Avery said quietly. "Is that your official position?" Rachel inhaled, steadying herself. "I'm instructing you to take your assigned seat in business, or we will have to return to the gate. Federal marshals will be involved." The threat hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Across the aisle, a man pretended to read his magazine. A woman froze mid-sip. No one spoke. Avery looked at Charles. He was grinning now, fully, enjoying this. His eyes met hers, and he mouthed 2 words without sound. "Bye-bye." She turned back to Rachel. "Understood." She stepped back from the suite. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She did not rush, did not hesitate. She walked 4 rows down and slid into seat 4, Bravo. The leather was soft, the legroom generous. It was, objectively, a good seat. But it was not the point. As she settled in, the cabin seemed to exhale, tension releasing in small, selfish breaths. Rachel straightened, smoothing her uniform, already turning back toward the front. Charles lifted his phone again, his laughter resuming like nothing had happened. Avery placed her bag beneath the seat. Her hands were steady. Inside her chest, something else had shifted. Not anger, not hurt. Focus. She looked down at her phone resting in her palm. The screen was dark. For a moment she let herself feel the quiet injustice of it. Not for herself alone, but for the pattern, the assumption, the ease with which her contract, her time, her presence had been dismissed. Then she unlocked the phone. The cabin door was still open, the plane still at the gate. Signal bars glowed strong in the corner of the screen. She bypassed her contacts and opened an encrypted app that did not exist on any public store. Its interface was spare. No logos, no colors, just numbers and access. She tapped a sequence that did not look like a number. It rang once. "Collins," said a male voice, crisp and alert. British accent softened by years in New York. "We weren't expecting a check-in until Zurich. Is everything all right?" Avery leaned back, angling her head just enough to see the back of Charles Whitmore's seat through the gap in the curtain. He was still talking, animated, gesturing with his glass. The man who believed the world bent by default. "No," Avery said. "It isn't." There was a pause on the other end. Not confusion. Attention. "Go on." "I'm on flight 109, she continued. "I was involuntarily downgraded to accommodate a passenger named Charles Whitmore. He's belligerent. The crew enabled it." Silence, the kind that sharpened rather than dulled. "Charles Whitmore," the voice repeated. "Whitmore Capital. Real estate. Late 50s. "Yes." Another pause. Avery could hear keys now, distant but rapid. "Do we have exposure?" "That's what I'm asking," Avery said. The typing intensified. Pulling it up, he said, We don't hold his primary debt, but... Hold on. A breath. A shift. Interesting. His European merger relies on a bridge loan from Sentinel Capital. $900 million. Needs to clear by noon Eastern. Avery's eyes narrowed slightly. And the guarantor? That would be us, he said. Through Collins' Vanguard. We underwrote the risk. Avery felt the smallest smile touch the corner of her mouth. It did not reach her eyes. So effectively, she said, I'm lending him the money he's using to sit in my seat. Yes, he replied. Effectively. She glanced down the aisle again. Rachel was offering hot towels now, her voice warm, her posture deferential. Charles accepted one, without looking, already bored of the drama he thought he'd won. Initiate a risk assessment review on the Whitmore account, Avery said. Cite erratic executive behavior and reputational exposure. There was hesitation this time. Avery, the voice said carefully, if we freeze the bridge loan now, the transfer will fail. The deal collapses. I'm aware. He'll lose the acquisition deposit, he continued. Market reaction could wipe out close to $1 billion in capitalization. Avery exhaled slowly. He told me to sit by the toilets. A beat. Then, understood, the voice said. Professional. Precise. Freezing the assets now. I'll flag the corporate cards for review as well. How long? 3 minutes to hit the network. Keep me on the line. She placed the phone face down on her thigh. The vibration of the engines hummed beneath her feet. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, cheerful and detached, announcing a brief delay for paperwork. Around her, the cabin resumed its curated calm. Crystal clinked. Laughter returned. At the front, Charles raised his glass again, speaking loudly into his phone. We're closing in 2 hours, he boasted. I'm going to own Zurich. Avery checked her watch. Minute 1. Rachel passed by without looking at her, towel extended toward another passenger, her earlier tension already forgotten. Avery watched her go, noting the set of her shoulders, the relief in her stride. Systems relaxed quickly once they believed order had been restored. Minute 2. Charles's voice rose. What do you mean, declined? He snapped. Heads turned. Avery slipped an earbud in, activating transparency mode. The sounds sharpened, layered, intimate. Run it again, Charles barked. Don't be an idiot! Rachel rushed toward him now, concern flickering. Mr. Whitmore, please lower your voice. Shut up, he snapped back. My CFO is telling me the wire is blocked. Avery's phone vibrated once beneath her hand. The freeze is confirmed, came the calm voice in her ear. Liquidity is 0. Avery closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, the cabin no longer felt calm. It felt like a stage, lights shifting, actors unaware that the script had changed. And Charles Whitmore was still standing center frame, smiling, convinced the world was exactly as he had always believed it to be. The smile slid off Charles Whitmore's face, as if someone had cut the string holding it up. It happened gradually at first, a crease between his brows, a slight stiffening of his jaw, the champagne glass pausing mid-air. He pressed the phone tighter to his ear, stepping into the aisle, voice dropping into something sharper, more dangerous. "Say that again," he said, slowly. Avery watched from 4 Bravo, her body still, her breathing measured. The cabin lighting reflected faintly off the polished wood, the illusion of serenity now stretched thin. She could feel the shift in the room before anyone spoke it aloud. Wealth had a smell when it panicked. It was sour, metallic. It cut through champagne and leather like smoke. "What do you mean, compliance froze it?" Charles snapped. "They can't just freeze it." "I've been with that bank for 20 years. His free hand curled into a fist. "I play golf with the regional director." Rachel hovered beside him, her earlier authority draining away. "Sir," she whispered, trying to soothe him without angering him, "please take your seat." "Not now," he barked, waving her off. He took another step, pacing the short length between his suite and the galley. His voice rose, cracking through the hush. "This is a 9-figure account. Run it again." Passengers were watching now, not openly, not yet, but heads had turned. Magazines lay forgotten. A man 2 rows back slowly lowered his noise-cancelling headphones. The curated calm was bleeding. Avery's phone vibrated again, a single pulse against her palm. "The Swiss bank just sent notice of payment failure," came the voice in her ear. "The sellers invoked the bad faith clause. The deal is terminated." Avery did not react. Her eyes stayed on Charles, on the way his shoulders had begun to hunch, the way his breathing had quickened. Power, when stripped suddenly, did not look dignified. It looked small. At the front, Charles stopped pacing. "Wait," he said, his tone shifting, the bravado leaking out. No, that's impossible. We're hours from closing." He laughed once, thin and brittle. "This is a glitch." "Tell them it's a glitch." Rachel stepped closer now, her hand hovering near his arm, uncertain. "Mr. Whitmore, please," she said, voice tight. "You need to sit down." He spun on her. "Don't touch me." The words were sharp, reflexive. His eyes were wild now, darting, calculating. "I need Wi-Fi." "Turn the Wi-Fi on." "We are still on the ground," Rachel said. "It doesn't engage until 10,000 feet. "Then open the door," he shouted. "I need to make a secure call." The cabin inhaled collectively. Someone gasped. A woman clutched her armrest. This was no longer inconvenience. This was instability. Avery leaned back slightly, crossing her ankles. She placed the phone on her lap, keeping the line open. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened screen, composed, almost detached. She had seen this before, in boardrooms, in negotiations that went wrong. Men who mistook leverage for invincibility always reacted the same way when gravity returned. Charles fumbled for his jacket, hands shaking. He pulled out a sleek black card and waved it in the air as if it were a weapon. "My card isn't working," he shouted. "Fix it!" Rachel took a step back. "Sir, please lower your voice." "Run it," he ordered, shoving the card toward her. "Charge 10,000. Buy the whole plane Wi-Fi if you have to." Her hands trembled as she took the card, moving to the terminal mounted near the galley. She swiped it once. A sharp beep. Red light. It didn't go through, she whispered. Again, he snapped. She swiped it again. The same sound. The terminal flashed words she had never seen before on a card like that. Declined. Account frozen. Rachel swallowed hard. It says it's frozen, sir. The color drained from Charles's face. Not embarrassment. Not anger. Fear. The kind that hollowed out eyes and left something animal behind. His phone buzzed in his hand. He stared at it, unblinking. 5 missed calls. Board chair. General counsel. His fingers slipped as he tapped the screen, putting the call on speaker without realizing it. Fix this, he said as soon as the line connected. The bank is malfunctioning. Charles, came the voice on the other end, cold and controlled. Stop talking. The cabin went silent. You triggered a liquidity crisis, the voice continued. Compliance flagged your call on the plane. The guarantor pulled the bridge loan. Charles blinked. Who, he said, barely audible, is the guarantor? Avery turned the page of the magazine resting on her tray table, the sound soft but deliberate. Collins Vanguard, the voice replied. Charles's head snapped up. His eyes scanned the cabin wildly, finally landing on Avery. The recognition was slow, horrifying. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. We're invoking the morality clause, the voice went on. You're suspended as CEO effective immediately. Do not travel internationally. If you leave the country, it will be construed as flight risk. The line went dead. Charles's phone slipped from his hand and hit the carpet with a dull thud. He stood there, chest heaving, staring at nothing. A man who had boarded the plane, convinced he owned it, now looked like a stranger in his own skin. Behind him, the cockpit door unlatched. Captain Harris stepped out, tall, silver hair catching the light. His expression was not curious. It was grim. He held a printed manifest in his hand, the paper crinkling softly as he walked past 1 Alpha, past 2, past 3. He stopped at 4 Bravo. Miss Collins, he said, voice respectful, steady. May I speak with you? Rachel gasped softly behind him. Captain. I handled the seating, she blurted. Mr. Whitmore is Diamond Medallion. The captain turned on her, his gaze sharp enough to cut. Miss Collins is the majority stakeholder in the leasing consortium that owns this aircraft. The words sucked the air out of the cabin. Rachel's face went white. Her mouth opened, closed. She looked at Avery as if seeing her for the first time, really seeing her, and realizing too late what she had done. Avery stood slowly. She smoothed the front of her coat, every movement unhurried. Thank you, Captain, she said. I don't need to speak to anyone right now. I just want the seat I paid for. She glanced toward the front of the plane. Charles stood frozen near the galley, sweat beading at his hairline, his world collapsing in real time. It appears, Avery added calmly, that it's currently occupied by someone who no longer has any authority here. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, electric, the kind that followed a gunshot in a crowded room, The hum of the auxiliary power unit faded into the background, drowned out by collective breath held too long. Charles took a step back, his shoulder brushing the wall. His eyes darted between the captain and Avery, his mind scrambling to reconcile the woman he had dismissed with the force that had just dismantled his life. "You," he croaked, his voice cracking. "You did this." "I did," Avery replied. Her voice was even, terrifyingly so. "I am the discrepancy you were concerned about." He tried to summon his old rage, the reflex that had served him for decades. "You think you can just press a button and destroy me?" he spat. "I have lawyers." Avery took one step closer. Not threatening. Precise. "You destroyed yourself," she said quietly. "I watched you for 10 minutes. You threatened crew, disclosed material information on an unsecured line, and lost control over a seat assignment. If you can't manage that, you can't manage $900 million. The captain stepped forward, his authority filling the space. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "you are unfit for transport." Charles backed toward the cockpit door, desperation clawing at him. "I paid $12,000 for this ticket." "Your status is irrelevant," the captain replied, already reaching for his radio. Avery turned slightly, her voice carrying, clear and final. "I do not feel safe traveling with this individual. He is erratic and aggressive. A desperate man at 30,000 feet is a danger to everyone on board." Rachel swallowed, then found her voice. "I agree, Captain," she said, trembling. "He grabbed my arm earlier." Charles spun on her. "You traitor." The captain nodded once. "That's sufficient?" The radio crackled. Law enforcement was on the way. Avery stepped back, returning to her place, her heart steady, her expression unreadable. The tempo of the moment continued to rise, tightening around the man who had believed himself untouchable. And Charles Whitmore, cornered and unraveling, finally understood what it meant to misjudge the quiet one in the room. The wait for the authorities lasted less than 3 minutes, but to Charles Whitmore it stretched into something endless, elastic, a corridor with no doors. He stood, pinned near the galley, back against polished walnut, breathing too fast, eyes darting as if searching for an exit that no longer existed. The cabin had become a tribunal. No one spoke to him. No one looked away. The cockpit door remained open now, a silent warning. Captain Harris stood slightly in front of Avery, not shielding her, but aligned with her, his posture rigid, his jaw set. He was no longer a host. He was the final authority on this aircraft, and the decision had already been made. Charles's phone vibrated again in his hand. He looked down at it as if it were a foreign object. Notifications stacked on the screen, one after another, relentless. Account closed. Credit review initiated. Board meeting emergency. Legal counsel resigned. His thumb hovered, useless. The device slipped from his grasp again and hit the carpet. This time, he did not reach for it. He pushed himself off the wall, straightening his jacket with shaking hands, trying to reassemble the man he had been minutes earlier. "This is insane," he said, forcing volume into his voice, aiming it at the captain, at the room, at anyone who might still be persuaded. "You can't do this. I have rights," Captain Harris did not raise his voice. You forfeited them when you became a threat. Avery watched the exchange with a calm that unsettled the entire cabin. She felt the eyes on her now, openly, unguarded. Curiosity. Awe. Something close to fear. She did not meet their gaze. Power did not need witnesses. Footsteps sounded on the jet bridge. Heavy. Deliberate. The cabin door filled with 2 officers from the Port Authority Police Department, broad-shouldered, faces impassive. Their presence snapped the moment into something real, something procedural. Which one? The lead officer asked, scanning the scene. Captain Harris lifted his hand and pointed. That gentleman. The officer approached Charles with efficient calm. Sir, he said, grab your belongings. You're coming with us. Charles laughed, a thin, broken sound. You don't understand, he said, gesturing wildly. She did this. She hacked my accounts. The officer did not look at Avery. That's a civil matter. Right now, you're trespassing on a federal aircraft. I'm not going anywhere, Charles shouted, backing up until he hit the cockpit door. I paid for this seat. The officer stepped closer. Sir, last warning. Charles swung his arm, striking the side of the suite in 1 alpha. The sound echoed. Sharp. Final. That's resisting, the officer said flatly. The next moments unfolded fast. The practiced grip. Pressure points. Charles yelped, his body folding forward as he was spun around and pinned against the galley wall. Metal cuffs snapped shut around his wrists, the sound loud in the silence. Click, click. You're making a mistake, Charles howled, the last of his old threats spilling out. I'll buy this airport. The second officer took his other arm. Tell it to the judge. They began to walk him down the aisle. It was not dignified. His shoes dragged, his jacket bunched. The man who had boarded, convinced of his dominance, now looked small, reduced, exposed. As they passed Avery, Charles stopped fighting. He turned his head, eyes red, voice dropping to a whisper that carried only to her. Who are you? Avery leaned in slightly, just enough. Her voice was low, intimate, devastating. I'm the person you should have been decent to. The officers pushed him forward. Move! The cabin door closed behind them with a heavy, final thud. The sound sealed something shut. The noise of Charles Whitmore faded down the jet bridge, swallowed by distance and consequence. Silence returned to the cabin. But it was different now. Charged. Reverent. Rachel stood frozen near the galley, hands shaking. Her face was pale, eyes glossy, the weight of realization settling in. She had not just mishandled a seating issue. She had revealed herself. Captain Harris turned to Avery. Ms. Collins, he said, removing his cap. On behalf of the airline, I apologize. Control has instructed us to rectify this immediately. Avery nodded once. Thank you, Captain. He gestured toward the front. Please. Rachel rushed ahead, her movements frantic now. She stripped the linens from 1 alpha with trembling efficiency, replacing them with fresh ones, sanitizing every surface as if erasing a stain. She did not look up. "Take your time," Avery said gently as she approached. The kindness landed harder than anger would have. Avery stepped into the suite. The seat was warm, the space quiet. It felt right. She sat down, closing the door halfway, not fully, leaving the world just visible enough. As she settled in, her phone buzzed softly. A message from Michael. "Market update. Whitmore Capital, down 22% in pre-market. Trading halted. Board liquidating assets to cover exposure." Avery stared at the screen for a moment, then typed a brief response. "Execute acquisition. Full position." She sent it just as the engines began to power up, the low rumble vibrating through the cabin. Outside, a police cruiser idled on the tarmac, red and blue lights flashing as Charles Whitmore was escorted away. The plane pushed back. Hours later, the cabin lights dimmed for the overnight crossing. The drama felt distant now, unreal, like something that had happened in another lifetime. Passengers spoke in hushed tones. No one laughed loudly anymore. Avery lay awake in 1 Alpha, laptop open, blue light reflecting in her eyes. Numbers shifted, assets moved, percentages changed hands. Somewhere far below, a city slept, unaware that an empire was being redistributed in silence. When the wheels touched down in Zurich, the morning light spilled through the windows, clean and pale. The cabin brightened. Rachel approached 1 Alpha again, holding a hot towel with careful hands. "Miss Collins," she whispered. "We've arrived. The station manager has arranged private stairs." Avery accepted the towel, wiping her hands slowly. She looked up at Rachel. The woman's eyes were rimmed red. She had been crying. "You're very good at your job when you're afraid," Avery said quietly. "It's a shame fear is what brings out your manners. Compassion costs nothing. Prejudice is very expensive." Rachel nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I understand." Avery stood, collected her bag, and stepped off the plane into the crisp alpine air. A line of black sedans waited. A man in a tailored coat opened the door for her, bowing his head slightly. "I expected you to be tired," he said. "You look like you won a war." Avery slid into the seat, closing the door behind her. "I didn't win a war," she replied, gaze forward. "I evicted a tenant." As the car pulled away, the plane stood quiet behind her, a vessel that had briefly become a courtroom, a mirror and a lesson. And somewhere, far from this clean morning, a man sat in a holding cell, finally understanding the cost of misjudgment. The city ahead waited. The work continued. And Avery Collins moved on, untouched, the silence around her as absolute as ever. The holding cell at JFK Terminal 4 did not smell like money or power. It smelled like bleach, old sweat, and metal that had been scrubbed too many times, and never enough. Charles Whitmore sat on a steel bench bolted to the concrete floor, his back hunched, his hands resting uselessly on his knees. His tailored suit was wrinkled beyond repair. His tie was gone. His shoelaces had been removed, leaving his expensive loafers slack and open like something already discarded. Time moved strangely there. The fluorescent light above him flickered every few seconds, a low electric buzz drilling into his skull. He had been sitting for hours. No phone, no assistant, no calls returned. Every assumption he had ever made about permanence was peeling away, layer by layer. The door clanged open. Charles jerked upright, hope flaring reflexively. Finally, he croaked, his throat raw. "Where's my lawyer? I want Baker and Mackenzie. I want this handled now." A woman stepped inside. She did not look like salvation. Mid-40s, tired eyes, a mismatched pantsuit that had seen better days, a battered briefcase in her hand. She did not offer him a smile. "Sit down, Mr. Whitmore," she said. Charles stared at her. "Who are you?" She dropped a thin file onto the metal table between them. The sound echoed. "My name is Sarah Keller. I'm a public defender." He laughed, a short, sharp sound that bordered on hysteria. "That's funny. I'm a billionaire." Sarah opened the file, sliding a single sheet of paper toward him. "Notice of asset freeze," she read aloud. "Due to admissions of material non-public information on a public aircraft, combined with bad faith default on a foreign bridge loan, all accounts have been frozen pending federal investigation." Charles stared at the words. They blurred. Frozen. Investigation. Pending. "This is a mistake," he whispered. "My wife. Linda. She'll post bail." Sarah exhaled slowly. "Your wife's attorney contacted the precinct an hour ago. Oh, emergency divorce filing. Temporary restraining order. She's not posting bail." The bench felt colder beneath him. The room seemed to tilt. "All I did," Charles said, his voice breaking, "was tell her to move seats." Sarah closed the file. "That woman," she said evenly, "was the guarantor of your loans." Silence swallowed the cell. Hours later, across an ocean, Avery Collins stood in a glass-walled conference room overlooking Zurich's financial district. Morning light poured in, clean and unforgiving. Men and women in tailored suits sat around the table, hands folded, screens glowing. They watched her with a mixture of respect and caution. Power had rearranged itself again. "The board panicked at 4 a.m. New York time," said Henrik Vogel, chairman of the Swiss consortium. "Emergency liquidation clause triggered. You acquired the Manhattan portfolio at 30 cents on the dollar." Avery flipped through the documents, her pen moving with calm precision. Deeds. Signatures. Numbers that represented lives and leverage. "Including the penthouse," Henrik added carefully. Avery paused, looked up. "Which one?" 432 Park Avenue. She nodded once. "Signed." "He built it to look down on everyone," she said quietly. "Now he'll learn what the sidewalk feels like." The meeting adjourned without ceremony. Deals concluded rarely needed celebration. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the transfer of gravity that had just occurred. Weeks passed. The headlines came and went. Whitmore Capital implodes. Board ousts CEO. Federal probes widen. The story lost novelty quickly, replaced by the next spectacle. Systems preferred amnesia. Avery preferred progress. She expanded the foundation quietly. Scholarships, seed funding. Doors opened where walls had stood. She did not give interviews. She did not need to explain herself. 3 months later, the Plaza Hotel glowed under crystal chandeliers and old money. The grand ballroom was filled with silk, diamonds, and soft laughter. Cameras flashed. The Sterling Foundation Gala was the most coveted ticket in the city. Avery stood at the podium in a gold gown that caught the light without begging for it. The room fell silent. "For too long," she said, her voice steady. "Access has been determined by assumptions. By gatekeepers who believed standing in the doorway meant owning the room." She paused, letting the words settle. "Tonight, we build a table instead." Applause rose, full and sustained. She stepped down, the weight of the past months finally easing from her shoulders. Outside, the night air was cool. Valets hurried. Engines idled. A line of luxury cars waited, their drivers moving with practiced deference. "Ms. Collins," the valet captain called, "your Maybach is coming around." A figure jogged forward from the shadows, older now, thinner, wearing a cheap polyester uniform that did not fit quite right. He moved with a slight limp, head bowed, eyes fixed on the pavement. He opened the rear door and spoke without looking up. "Your car, ma'am." Avery froze. She knew the voice before the face. She spoke softly. "Look at me." The man hesitated. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his head. Charles Whitmore stared back at her. The recognition hit him like a blow. His mouth fell open. His eyes filled with something that looked like shame, stripped of arrogance. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know." Avery studied him. The hollowed cheeks, the cheap uniform, the absence of entitlement. "That was your mistake," she said. "Not that you didn't know who I was, that you didn't think it mattered who anyone was." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a crisp bill. $100. She placed it gently in his shaking hand. "Keep the change," she said. The door closed. The car pulled away, blending into the river of lights on Fifth Avenue. Charles stood on the curb, clutching the bill to his chest as the world moved past him, finally small enough to understand it. Inside the car, Avery leaned back, the city reflecting in the glass. Somewhere, another gatekeeper was deciding who belonged. Somewhere else, another door was waiting to be opened. And Avery Collins moved forward, the quiet power she carried unchanged, the lesson left behind exactly where it belonged. The city never noticed when Charles Whitmore disappeared. That was the part that hurt the most. New York kept breathing. Taxis kept honking. Deals kept closing. The sidewalk did not remember him. It only reflected him back now. Smaller, slower, anonymous. Every morning he reported to probation at 8 sharp, passing through a metal detector that beeped too often, watched by guards who did not care what his last name used to mean. He learned the rhythm of waiting rooms, the sound of clipboards, the way people avoided eye contact when dignity had already been stripped away. He learned how long a minute felt when it carried no leverage. At night, he lay awake in a rented room in Queens, staring at a ceiling stained with water rings, replaying the moment over and over. The seat, the tone in his voice, the casual cruelty of it. He told himself he would have behaved differently if he had known. Then the truth crept in, slow and merciless. He would not have, because the problem had never been ignorance. It had been certainty. Across the Atlantic, Avery Collins stood on a balcony overlooking Lake Zurich, the early evening light turning the water into polished steel. The city below moved with deliberate precision. Trams glided. Pedestrians crossed on signal. Everything worked because people assumed responsibility, not entitlement. Her phone rested on the glass railing beside her. It buzzed once. A message from Michael. Final filings complete. Manhattan portfolio fully transferred. Occupants notified. Avery did not respond immediately. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the breeze cool her skin. Power, when exercised correctly, did not exhilarate. It clarified. It reduced noise. Inside, the apartment was quiet. No staff, no assistants hovering. She preferred it that way. The quiet let her think. It let her remember why she had built what she built in the first place. She had grown up watching rooms close softly, doors that were never slammed, just never opened. She had learned early that systems rarely announced their cruelty. They simply enforced it with smiles and policies and plausible deniability. So she had learned another language. Capital, risk, leverage. She had learned how to move without asking permission. That night, she reviewed a proposal from the Foundation's legal team. The Open Table Initiative. Not charity. Infrastructure. Funding for founders who were tired of being told to wait their turn in rooms they had helped build. She approved it with a single tap. Weeks later, Zurich faded into memory as Avery boarded another flight, this one uneventful, anonymous. She liked it that way. No confrontations, no tests, just motion. The world did not always need reminders. Back in New York, Charles learned how to fold suits for other men, how to open doors without being seen, how to smile without expecting anything back. He learned how quickly respect vanished when it was no longer reinforced by money. He learned that apologies carried more weight when they came without witnesses. One afternoon, during a break behind the valet stand, he overheard two young men arguing about a startup pitch. One complained about gatekeepers, about not getting meetings. Charles said nothing. He understood now that the door had never been locked. It had simply never been meant for them, or for him. Not really. He had just mistaken a temporary badge for ownership. The gala photos circulated for a week. Avery Collins in gold, senators shaking her hand, headlines that framed her as visionary, formidable, inevitable. She skimmed none of it. Legacy was not built in captions. Instead, she spent time in rooms without cameras, listening, asking questions, funding solutions quietly. The work felt heavier now, more deliberate. The world was changing, slowly, stubbornly, and she intended to outlast the resistance. One evening, as she reviewed quarterly reports, her phone rang. Unknown number. She let it ring once, twice. Answered. "Ms. Collins," a voice said carefully. "This is the Department of Justice. We're closing the Whitmore case." Avery listened without interruption. "No charges pursued against you," the voice continued. "Full cooperation noted." "Thank you." She ended the call and stared at the city outside her window. Another chapter closed. Another system corrected itself, just enough to survive. Months passed. The memory of the plane softened at the edges, not because it hurt less, but because it had served its purpose. The lesson had landed where it needed to. On a cold morning in late winter, Avery stood at a long table in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. Around her sat founders, engineers, organizers. Some nervous, some defiant. All underestimated at least once. "We're not here to ask for permission," she said. Her voice was steady, not raised. "We're here to remove the need for it." Heads nodded. Pens moved. Something solid took shape. Outside, traffic crawled. Somewhere across the city, Charles parked another car, hands numb from the cold. He caught his reflection in the side mirror of a black sedan. Older, quieter, still breathing. He thought of the woman on the plane, not with bitterness now, but with a strange, aching clarity. He understood what she had taken from him, and what she had given back. Avery closed her laptop at the end of the day, exhaustion settling into her bones. It was the good kind, earned, necessary. She stood by the window as the sun dipped low, painting the skyline in amber and shadow. The world had not changed all at once. It never did. But somewhere, a door was open that had not been before. Somewhere, a table had been extended. And Avery Collins remained exactly where she had always been, not above the system, not outside it, but standing firmly at the point where it could no longer pretend it did not see her. The first letter arrived without ceremony, slipped under the door of Avery Collins's Manhattan office early on a Monday morning. Cream envelope. Government seal. No return address she didn't already recognize. She read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it in the bottom drawer of her desk. Closure was rarely loud. Outside her window, the city moved with its usual indifference. Sirens. Construction. People late for things that mattered only to them. Inside, the room was quiet, the kind of quiet that came from decisions already made. Avery sat back in her chair, fingertips pressed together, and allowed herself a single breath of reflection. Not satisfaction. Satisfaction was shallow. This was alignment. Across the city, Charles Whitmore stood in line at a probation office, clutching a folded piece of paper that listed his obligations in small, unforgiving print. He no longer argued with clerks. He no longer demanded timelines. He waited. Waiting had become his new skill. He had learned that the world responded better to compliance than to outrage when you had nothing left to trade. A man behind him sighed loudly. Charles did not turn. He stared at the scuffed linoleum floor, counting cracks. He understood now how quickly impatience turned into judgment, how easily he had once done the same. When his name was called, it sounded wrong in the room. Smaller, less certain. He followed the officer down the hall without protest. Later that afternoon, Avery sat in a conference room with her legal team, reviewing the final dissolution documents of Whitmore Capital. No drama, no grand statements, just signatures and dates. A company that had once dominated skylines reduced to files and footnotes. Any concerns? Her attorney asked. Avery shook her head. No, what she did not say was that the concern had never been the company. It had been the culture that allowed men like Charles to confuse access with ownership. Dismantling a structure was easy. Changing the belief system beneath it took longer. That evening, Avery attended a small dinner in Brooklyn. No press, no donors, just founders sharing bad wine and better ideas. She listened more than she spoke. She always did. Power listened when it wanted to last. A young woman across the table hesitated before speaking. "They keep telling me I don't look like a CEO," she said, half joking, half not. Avery met her eyes. "Good," she replied. "It means they don't see you coming." The room laughed softly, the tension breaking. But the truth lingered. On the way home, Avery's car passed the Plaza Hotel. Light spilled onto the sidewalk. Valets moved like chess pieces. For a moment, the memory flickered. The $100 bill. The way Charles's hand had shaken. The look in his eyes when the story finally made sense. She did not dwell on it. Lessons were meant to be absorbed, not replayed. Weeks turned into months. The foundation expanded quietly. Partnerships formed. A pipeline of capital moved toward places it had never been allowed to flow. There was resistance, of course. There always was. Emails questioning judgment. Calls expressing concern. She answered them all the same way. With numbers. With results. With silence when silence was stronger. One afternoon, Michael appeared in her doorway, tablet in hand. "You should see this," he said. He showed her a report. A competitor had folded. Another had quietly adopted her firm's standards. Influence rippled outward, subtle, undeniable. Avery nodded. Good. Across town, Charles received his final notice. Probation completed. Travel restrictions lifted, accounts still frozen. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer of the rented dresser. It did not feel like freedom. It felt like a pause. He found work where he could. Delivery shifts, maintenance, jobs that ended with sore hands and no applause. Each night, he slept exhausted. Each morning, he woke up without dread, which felt like progress. Sometimes he passed buildings he used to own. He did not look up anymore. He had learned that height was not perspective. It was distance. On a crisp fall morning, Avery stood on a stage at a university auditorium, speaking to a room full of students who had never seen someone like her occupy that space so effortlessly. She did not talk about revenge. She talked about structure, about how systems were built by people and could be rebuilt by people willing to be patient and precise. Power, she said, is not loud. It does not announce itself. It waits for you to underestimate it. The applause was thoughtful, not explosive. She preferred that. Afterward, a professor approached her. "You changed a lot of trajectories," he said. Avery smiled faintly. "So did a lot of people before me. They just didn't get credit." That night, alone in her apartment, Avery poured herself a glass of water and stood by the window. The city lights stretched endlessly. a constellation of ambition and failure intertwined. Somewhere down there, Charles was likely finishing another shift, blending into the crowd. Somewhere else, a young founder was drafting a proposal that would have been ignored last year and funded tomorrow. The world did not transform overnight, but it tilted. Just enough. Avery finished her water and set the glass down. Tomorrow would bring new battles, quieter ones. She welcomed them. The work was far from over. And in that steady, uncelebrated continuation, the true consequence of a single seat on a plane finally revealed itself. The news cycle had already moved on, but the consequences had not. They never did. They settled quietly into the foundations of lives, altering load-bearing walls long after the headlines faded. Avery Collins learned this the way she learned most truths now, through data rather than drama. A quarterly report crossed her desk one morning, showing a subtle but undeniable shift. Loan approvals in districts long labeled high risk were trending upward. Venture capital, once concentrated in 3 zip codes, had begun to spread. Not evenly, not fairly, but measurably. Systems resisted change until pressure made resistance inefficient. She closed the report and looked out over the river. The water moved the same way it always had, indifferent to intention, responding only to gravity and force. That was the lesson she had built her life around. You did not argue with gravity. You learned how to use it. Across the city, Charles Whitmore finished mopping the lobby floor of an office building that used to carry his name. The sign had been replaced, the letters gone, leaving lighter marks on darker stone. He noticed them every time. Absence had a way of becoming its own presence. He leaned on the mop handle, catching his breath. His back ached. His hands were raw. But there was a strange clarity in the pain. It had an edge, a beginning and an end. Unlike the old stress, which had been endless and numbing, this hurt was honest. A woman in a tailored coat stepped over the wet floor, barely glancing at him. For a flicker of a second, irritation flashed across her face. He saw it, recognized it. He stepped back immediately, apologetic, invisible. The moment passed. She never knew who he had been. That knowledge no longer stung. It instructed. Later that week, Avery sat in a closed door meeting with regulators. No accusations, no threats, just alignment. The room was filled with careful language and deliberate pauses. Everyone there understood that reputations mattered, but leverage mattered more. "We're seeing increased stability," one official noted, tapping a folder. "Your underwriting criteria appear to discourage the kind of behavior we've historically struggled to control." Avery inclined her head. "Risk is rarely about numbers," she said. "It's about character under pressure." No one disagreed. Outside, reporters waited, hoping for a quote. She gave none. Influence was most effective when it did not invite debate. That evening, Avery attended a small private screening hosted by a non-profit she quietly funded. The film was about access, about doors that closed without sound, about people who learned to build their own entrances when none were offered. The audience was small. The impact would not be. During the discussion afterward, a young man asked, Do you believe people really change? Avery considered the question. She thought of Charles, of the way his voice had cracked, of the way his eyes had searched for an answer that money could not buy. Some do, she said. Most don't. That's why systems matter more than intentions. The man nodded, thoughtful. That was enough. Charles spent his evenings reading now. Not business journals, history, philosophy. Things he had once dismissed as impractical. He found himself underlining sentences. He found himself uncomfortable. Growth, he realized, was rarely comfortable. It was invasive. It rearranged things you had spent decades protecting. One night, as he walked home from a late shift, he passed a restaurant window. Inside, a group of executives toasted something. Laughter, raised glasses. For a brief moment, envy flickered. Then it passed. What replaced it surprised him. Relief. He did not miss the performance. He did not miss the pretending. He missed being useful. Avery understood usefulness differently now as well. Success had once been about proving capability. Now it was about removing friction for others. The thrill of acquisition had dulled. The satisfaction of infrastructure remained. She approved funding for a regional bank initiative in the Midwest. Not glamorous, not headline-worthy. But it would change lives quietly, which was the point. At night, she sometimes replayed the early moments of the flight. Not the confrontation, the decision, the precise second when she chose action over endurance. She wondered how many times she had chosen endurance before learning that lesson. Too many. The past did not haunt her. It informed her. Months passed. Seasons shifted. Leaves fell. Snow came. The city adapted as it always did. Avery's name appeared on lists she did not read. Awards she did not attend. She delegated gratitude. Charles completed another training module, another requirement, another quiet step forward. His probation officer signed off on his final evaluation with a neutral nod. "Don't come back," she said, not unkindly. He smiled faintly. He did not intend to. On his way out, he passed a bulletin board with flyers for community programs, mentorship, literacy, housing support. He tore off one number and folded it into his pocket. For the first time in years, he did not assume he knew the path. He asked for directions. Avery received an invitation she almost declined. A closed-door policy forum in Washington. No cameras, no speeches, just architects of systems arguing about the future. She went. Not because she wanted the seat at the table, because she wanted to decide how the table was built. The conversation was tense. Opinions clashed. Old instincts surfaced. Avery listened, then spoke once. "We keep treating inequity like an accident," she said. "It isn't. It's a design flaw, and design flaws don't correct themselves." Silence followed, then questions, then recalibration. On the flight back, she sat by the window, watching clouds shift and part. She thought again of that first flight. How something so small had revealed something so large. How the system had exposed itself under minimal pressure. Charles stood in line at a food pantry on a Saturday morning, not because he was starving, because he had volunteered. He stocked shelves. He carried boxes. No one recognized him. No one needed to. A woman thanked him, sincerely, without expectation. The words landed harder than any applause he had ever received. Avery closed her laptop as the plane descended. The city below came into focus. Another landing. Another continuation. No climax, just motion. The story was not over. It was never over. It simply moved into its next phase, quieter, deeper, rooted in consequences that no one would ever trace back to a single seat on a plane. But they were there, embedded, working, and both of them, in ways neither could have predicted, were finally learning what it meant to belong. The invitation arrived handwritten, not because it needed to be, but because someone wanted it to be taken seriously. Avery Collins recognized the intent immediately. No logos, no titles, just her name, spelled carefully, and a location she knew well enough to understand the subtext. A private room, a long table, people who preferred influence without attribution. She arrived alone. The building was unremarkable from the outside, a limestone facade that blended into its block as if deliberately refusing distinction. Inside, the air was cool and still. A man at the door checked her name against a list and nodded without comment. No pleasantries. Respect did not need rehearsal. The room was already half full. Men and women in their 50s and 60s, most of them with the posture of people accustomed to being deferred to. Old networks, quiet power. They looked up when Avery entered, eyes assessing, recalibrating. Some recognized her immediately. Others did not. That distinction no longer mattered. She took her seat without ceremony. The discussion began the way these things always did. Carefully. Abstractly. Words like stability, continuity, market confidence floated across the table. Concerns were raised about volatility, about precedent, about what happened when systems were forced to bend too quickly. Avery listened. She always listened first. When she finally spoke, she did not raise her voice. She did not lean forward. She did not argue. Stability is not the absence of change, she said. It's the ability to survive it. A man across the table frowned. You're suggesting we normalize disruption. I'm suggesting we stop pretending it isn't already happening, Avery replied. What you call disruption is often correction. You just don't like being the ones corrected. Silence followed. Not offended. Thoughtful. This was a room that respected clarity. The meeting ended without resolution. That was fine. Real shifts never happened in one sitting. They happened in the spaces between. Later that evening, Avery walked home instead of taking a car. The city was quieter at that hour, the kind of quiet that let you hear footsteps echo against stone. She passed storefronts closing for the night, lights dimming one by one. She felt grounded, present. Across the river, in a community center basement, Charles Whitmore stacked folding chairs after a meeting. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. A small group had gathered to talk about second chances. No microphones, no sponsors, just people telling the truth because no one was paying them to lie. Charles had not spoken much. He had listened. When he did speak, it was measured, almost cautious, as if he was still learning how much space his words were allowed to take. "I thought success made me important," he said at one point, eyes fixed on the floor. "It didn't. It just made me louder." No one laughed. No one applauded. They nodded. That was enough. When the meeting ended, a woman approached him. "You coming back next week?" she asked. "Yes," Charles said without hesitation. The certainty surprised him. Days folded into weeks. Avery returned to her work with renewed focus. She declined interviews. She funded projects that would never bear her name. She sat in rooms where her presence shifted outcomes without spectacle. This phase of her life felt less like ascent and more like anchoring. One afternoon, Michael handed her a slim folder. "Final update," he said. She opened it. A single-page summary. Whitmore Capital fully dissolved. Remaining assets absorbed. Case officially closed. Avery closed the folder. "Thank you." "That's it," Michael said. "No loose ends." Avery did not respond immediately. She thought of the phrase, "loose ends." She had learned that some ends were not meant to be tied. They were meant to be lived with. That night, she stood at her kitchen window. The city spread beneath her like a circuit board, lit and humming. She thought again of the plane. Not the confrontation. The choice. The moment she decided not to shrink. She understood now that power was not something you seized. It was something you accepted responsibility for. Across town, Charles finished a late shift and stepped out into the cold. Snow had begun to fall, light and dry. He pulled his jacket tighter and walked toward the subway, breath visible in the air. He no longer avoided his reflection in windows. He did not search for it either. At the platform, a young man recognized him, or thought he did. He stared for a moment, uncertain, then turned away. Charles felt a strange relief. Anonymity was not erasure. It was permission. The train arrived. Doors opened. People shuffled in. Charles found a seat and watched the city blur past underground. He thought of the woman on the plane. Not with regret, with gratitude. She had not spared him pain. She had spared him illusion. Avery received an email late that night from a founder she had backed months earlier. The subject line was simple. "We got approved." She smiled. Not broadly, just enough. The world did not change because of one confrontation, one decision, one seat. It changed because moments like that accumulated, quietly, insistently, until denial became inefficient. Avery closed her laptop and turned off the light. Tomorrow would bring another table, another conversation, another chance to choose clarity over comfort. Charles stepped off the train and climbed the stairs into the night. The snow had covered the city in a thin, even layer. Softening edges, leveling surfaces. For the first time in a long while, he felt steady. Neither of them thought of the other in that moment. They did not need to. The connection had already done its work. The story was nearing its end, not with triumph or tragedy, but with something rarer. Consequence fully realized, identity fully stripped, Purpose finally chosen, and somewhere between a private room and a subway platform, the long arc of the moment completed its quiet bend. The morning Avery Collins stepped onto the tarmac in Tokyo, the air was cool and clean, the kind that sharpened focus instead of dulling it. The city waited beyond the glass like a living system, layered, precise, relentless. She adjusted her coat and moved forward without pause. There was a meeting in 40 minutes. Capital to allocate. Doors to open. The work did not end because a story reached its final page. Inside the terminal, people moved with quiet efficiency. No one recognized her. That anonymity felt earned. She had learned that visibility was a tool, not a requirement. The true measure of impact was what continued to function when no one was watching. Hours later, seated at a conference table overlooking a skyline of steel and light, Avery listened as partners outlined projections. Markets, risk, opportunity. She asked fewer questions than she once had. She no longer needed to probe for weakness. It surfaced on its own when pressure was applied correctly. When the meeting ended, contracts signed, she stood alone by the window for a moment. The city pulsed below, indifferent to individual ambition, responsive only to systems that understood scale. She saw herself reflected faintly in the glass. Not the woman from the plane, not the woman from the gala, just herself, grounded, clear. Across the ocean, in New York, Charles Whitmore finished his shift and locked up the community center. The room was empty now, chairs stacked, lights dimmed. He stood for a moment, keys in hand, listening to the silence. It no longer frightened him. Silence had become a teacher. He walked home through streets dusted with the remnants of winter. He passed a newsstand displaying headlines about markets and mergers. Names he once knew intimately. He did not stop. He had learned that knowing was not the same as belonging. At his apartment, he cooked a simple meal and sat at the small table by the window. He ate slowly, mindfully. The city outside hummed. Somewhere, a siren wailed and faded. He thought of nothing in particular. That, too, felt earned. Weeks passed. Avery moved between cities, meetings blending into one another. Each decision another thread woven into something larger than herself. She saw the effects not in praise, but in pattern shifts. More approvals, fewer exceptions. A subtle recalibration of who was assumed to matter. One evening, she attended a quiet dinner hosted by a regional bank. No cameras, no speeches. A handful of executives discussing lending models. She spoke once, briefly, about accountability and design. When she finished, no one rushed to respond. They took notes instead. That night, alone in her hotel room, Avery opened her laptop and reviewed a familiar file. The original flight manifest, the time stamp, the seat assignment. She closed it without emotion, not because it no longer mattered, but because it had already done its work. In New York, Charles received a letter from the community center thanking him for his time. They asked if he would consider training as a coordinator. A small stipend, more responsibility. He read the letter twice, then set it down carefully. He felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Not pride, trust. He accepted. Spring arrived quietly. Trees bloomed, sidewalks filled. The city adjusted its rhythm. Avery returned home to Manhattan for a brief stretch, her calendar unusually light. She walked Central Park one morning, hands in her pockets, moving at the pace of someone with nowhere urgent to be. She passed a bench where two women argued softly about a business idea. One said no one would listen. The other said they would find another way. Avery smiled to herself and kept walking. Later that day, she visited the foundation office. Staff moved with purpose, energy high. A whiteboard listed new initiatives: rural lending, education access, legal clinics. She added a note in the margin and stepped back. It was no longer about her vision alone. That was the point. As evening settled, Avery stood at her window again, the city stretching endlessly. She thought of the question people always asked when they reduced stories like hers into slogans. Was it revenge or mercy? She understood now that it had been neither. It had been consequence, clear, proportionate, unavoidable. Charles understood that, too, in his own way. On a warm evening, he locked up the center and stood outside, watching the streetlights flicker on. A group of teenagers laughed nearby. A woman walked her dog. Life moved forward without regard for what he used to be. He did not resent it. He was learning how to move with it instead. They would never meet again. They did not need to. The exchange had already completed its arc. Something had been taken. Something else had been given. Balance restored, not dramatically, but definitively. Avery closed her laptop and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would bring another flight, another room, another quiet test of character. She would meet it the same way she always had, with restraint, with clarity, with the understanding that power was not proven by how loudly it was exercised, but by how precisely. And somewhere out there, someone was being underestimated in a room that believed it was secure. Somewhere else, someone was learning what it meant to start over without illusion. The system continued to turn, shaped by moments most people never noticed. If this story stayed with you, let it be a reminder carried forward, not a lesson outward from a distance. Like the story, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with these 3 words. Know your worth.